What we're looking at here are NATO live-fire drills taking place in Finland, less than 100 miles from the Russian border. This is historic footage, because until very recently, Finland was a neutral country, meaning it had sworn not to join any military alliances. But now, it is a member of the world's largest alliance, and has brought that alliance right to Vladimir Putin's doorstep. So why did Finland abandon 8 decades of neutrality and become NATO's 31st member? And what does that mean for Finland, for NATO, and for Russia? And what does all of that tell us about the ever-shifting world of geopolitics? We're going to give you the big picture, recap the history, and speak to Finnish commanders and decision-makers to find out. This is Finland, up here in the far northeastern corner of Europe, a Nordic nation that's partially inside the Arctic Circle. To the south are the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, so called because they sit on the Baltic Sea, which is here. To the west is Sweden, and to the north is Norway. Finland has friendly relations with all these countries. And then there's Russia. The two share an 820-mile-long border, and their relations are not so good. But we'll come back to that in a moment. Finland is a geographically large country, but has a relatively small population and an economy that's on the small side too. You can see how that stacks up against the rest of its neighborhood, putting it somewhere just below average. But all of these countries are absolutely dwarfed by the behemoth sitting just to the east. For that reason, they worry quite a lot about their security. Finland in particular has a much bigger military than you'd expect. 2 of Finland's stats are worth highlighting. First, ground troops. Finland has a lot of them because it still has conscription. Every man becomes eligible for service when he turns 18. Conscripts do at least 5 months of basic training, then become reservists, ready for call-up until they turn 50. Second is artillery. Finland has the largest artillery force in Europe, aside from Russia. Artillery is known as the king of battle because it causes a lot of casualties. And if you're trying to scare off a bigger neighbor, that's exactly the sort of weapons you want. Compare those figures to Finland's neighbors, and you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Finland's military is by far the biggest. Even compared to Russia, Finland is no pushover. If we go back to the tape, we can see what all of that looks like in real life. These men are conscripts, completing their mandatory service in the Finnish artillery forces. And this is the gun they've been learning to use, the K9 Thunder. It was made in South Korea and bought by Finland for around $3 million apiece. This gun and its crew are taking part in a live-fire exercise called Dynamic Front. The exercise involves the whole of NATO, so the British, French, and Americans are also here alongside many others. Everyone insists this drill isn't designed to send a message to anyone in particular, but in reality, Russia is just over here, so you can be the judge on that one. But why does Finland, more than any of its neighbors, worry about being invaded by Russia? Let's dive into the files to explain. Finland and Russia have a long history of fighting one another, and we're not going to try and recap all of it here, but we are going back to the start of the current chapter during the Second World War because it explains why things are the way they are today. In 1939, what was then the Soviet Union invaded Finland as part of a deal with Nazi Germany, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, to split Eastern Europe between them like so. But the Finns inflicted huge losses on the Soviets, and they agreed to stop their invasion provided they got to keep these bits of the country. When the Nazis and Soviets broke their pact and went to war with one another, the Finns got into an alliance of convenience with the Nazis and invaded the Soviets back. But the Nazis were defeated, so the Soviets forced Finland to hand back this land and pledge themselves to neutrality. This was supposed to put a stop to all the fighting. Finland could have an army to defend itself, but couldn't use it against Russia, couldn't join any military alliances, and couldn't allow foreign armies onto its soil. In return, the Soviets promised not to attack Finland either. The deal worked, and neutrality became the cornerstone of Finnish foreign and defense policy for the next 8 decades. During the Cold War, Finland acted as a buffer zone between East and West. Soviet Russia and its allies, known as the Warsaw Pact, were on one side, and America and its allies, NATO, were on the other, but Finland could not join either one. The policy held strong even after 1991, when the Warsaw Pact and Soviet Union collapsed. A lot of other states took this opportunity to join NATO, including, in 2004, the Baltics. But the Finns didn't join. Being neutral kept them safe in the past, and the Finns believed that staying neutral would keep them safe in the future. They weren't naive, however. Being neutral didn't mean giving up their army, and if they weren't in NATO, then it was better to err on the side of caution and build a big one. That's why Finland has a much larger military than all its neighbours, who are either in the alliance or, in the case of Sweden, shielded by countries who are. But all of that changed when Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. This war scared the Finns because, back in 1994, Russia had also given its word not to attack Ukraine. Suddenly, Russia's promise to leave Finland alone if it remained neutral didn't seem worth the paper it was written on. Ukraine had expressed interest in joining NATO, but it wasn't a member when Putin invaded. In fact, Finland was closer to joining the alliance than Kiev was at the time. Finns realized that staying out of NATO was making them less and not more safe. If Putin was willing to attack Ukraine, he might be willing to attack them as well. Public opinion swung rapidly in favor of joining, and just 3 months after the Ukraine war began, Finland ditched 80 years of neutrality and applied to join. It was accepted the following year, and Sweden followed suit in 2024. This was a big moment, not just for Finland, but for NATO and for Russia as well. Why? Let's take another look into the files. This is NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as it looked before Finland and Sweden joined. NATO has been the bedrock of European security since the end of the Second World War, designed to stop the Soviets and then Russia from expanding to the West. The basic principle is collective security. Alone, none of these countries are powerful enough to stop an invasion, which might encourage Russia to launch one. But together, they are formidable, which should be enough to stop any attack before it starts. This is embodied in NATO's Article 5. What this says, basically, is that if you mess with any one of us, then you mess with all of us. But even an alliance as powerful as NATO has its weak spots, and the Baltics have been known for a long time as its Achilles heel. These 3 small nations, way out on NATO's east flank, are sandwiched between Russia proper on one side and the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad on the other. This is a piece of territory Russia hung onto after the Soviet Union collapsed and is bristling with military bases. Belarus, a close ally of Russia, is over here to the south, and the Baltic Sea is to the north. In fact, the only geographic connection between the Baltics and the rest of NATO is here, a remote corridor of land in northeastern Poland known as the Suwalki Gap. Just 50 miles wide, it has long been feared that, if Russia was going to launch an attack on NATO, then this is where it would choose to do it. A swift attack from east and west could cut off the Baltics from reinforcement by land, whilst Russian fleets deploying from Kaliningrad and St. Petersburg could cut them off by sea. That would pave the way for a full-scale invasion of exactly the kind that NATO is supposed to prevent. With no easy way to get troops to the Baltic, Article 5 would be meaningless. NATO's armies would be stuck miles away from the main battle. In fact, a series of war games carried out by the Obama administration in 2014 revealed NATO would comprehensively lose this fight. That's why Finland and Sweden joining NATO is such a big deal, because of where they are on the map. What they do is massively reinforce the alliance's northern flank, right where it was previously weakest. The Baltic Sea now has NATO nations on every side, meaning if there ever was a war, it would be really difficult for Russia to use it. Sweden has a fleet of sophisticated submarines which could play havoc with any Russian blockade, and if the Baltic Sea remains open, then Finnish troops and artillery can be moved across it to reinforce the front line, even if Russia is able to close the Suwalki Gap. Aside from that, Finland is also thought to have lots of experience spying on Russia and can bring that intelligence into any conflict. And Finnish troops are specialists fighting in cold climates like those found in the Baltics. All of which is to say, Finland doesn't just bring firepower to the alliance, it brings crucial know-how which it can pass along to other NATO militaries. For Finland and the Baltics, that means greater security. Russia is far less likely to attack them if it thinks it will lose the ensuing war. For NATO, it means increased capabilities and a more united front against Russia. There is now a continuous line of NATO nations running from Finland in the north to Romania in the south and Turkey in the east to keep Russia at bay. Only Ukraine, where Russia is currently at war, and Georgia, where Russia went to war in 2008, break that defensive perimeter. And for Russia itself, it means far less freedom of maneuver. There are now very few places that Moscow can attack that won't risk triggering Article 5 and a response by all of these countries. And triggering Article 5 is something that Russia clearly fears. Despite all of Ukraine's neighbors donating weapons to help it defend itself against Russia's invasion, Russia has not attacked any of them. We can't know for sure what goes on inside Putin's head, but the fact that they are all in NATO surely has something to do with it. Ostensibly, Putin went to war with Ukraine to keep NATO away from Russia's borders. But in doing so, he has actually brought NATO right to his border, an 800-mile stretch of it that the alliance previously didn't touch. And that makes his aims of Russian expansion much harder to achieve. But that only remains true if the alliance holds together. Togetherness is the nature of collective security. If NATO starts to falter or break apart, then it no longer serves as a deterrent, especially if America, by far the single largest member, decides it is no longer in its interest to contribute to the alliance. If America quits or walks back its commitments and Europe cannot find the money and political willpower to fill the gap, then NATO could crumble. And if NATO crumbles, then all of these countries could once again find themselves at risk from their much larger and much more powerful neighbor. But don't just take our word for it. We went to Finland to speak to troops and their commanders to find out more. Finland is now part of NATO, the world's largest and most powerful military alliance. But it wasn't always that way. Ever since the end of the Second World War, as a diplomatic price to be paid for being left alone by the Soviets, Finland was bound to diplomatic neutrality. That meant it couldn't join any military alliance. But after the invasion of Ukraine, Finland concluded that Russian security guarantees weren't worth the paper they were written on. They decided that the only way to guarantee their future security was inside the alliance. So, along with neighbor Sweden, they joined up. And now, here we are.
I'm the exercise director of this Lightning Strike 24. My sort of peacetime position is that I'm the commandant of the Army Academy, about 30 kilometers, that is within a cannon range from the Russian border. This is the biggest NATO exercise in which artillery is taking part. We have several goals in this exercise. They are dealing with interoperability, how to use the firepower of alliance to support operations. It deals with command and control. It deals how to direct fire, and it also deals with logistical issues. Basically, all the units in this exercise, even though this is led by the 56th Artillery Command, are led by a single land command, which is situated in this exercise in city of Mikkeli in Finland.
This is the first time that Finland has hosted a NATO exercise since joining the alliance. I wanted to know what the troops were learning from each other and why they chose Finland to host the exercise.
Here in Rovajärvi, we are able to rehearse artillery tactics, do lots of artillery firing position changes. And the terrain is very different compared to white sands in the USA. I think we would be very willing to learn what are the circumstances and what are the conditions if we should be using our Finnish artillery, for example, in Article 5 mission in somewhere else in Europe. Because our tactics is mainly how we are defending Finland and alliance in this terrain.
The training takes place only a few miles from the border with Russia. I wanted to know what message this joint exercise was sending to Putin.
This sends a message that we are able to train together. We are developing our assets, but this isn't any sort of like show of force. If somebody wants to interpret that in that way, that's their issue.
So I think it's a really positive message, clearly with Finland and with Sweden as the latest two NATO members, to really bolster the alliance and make it stronger. And therefore our commitment to NATO is very strong, hence why we've come here now to Finland to demonstrate that commitment. We're learning how to interoperate, we're learning those procedures that we need to use together, we're learning how to connect our equipment together, and critically by working as teams, we're learning how to work and fight alongside each other. That's an important part of our deterrence and would allow us to come and defend if we could.
Geography obviously doesn't change, or at least doesn't change very fast. And the Suwalki Gap has always been known as basically the linchpin of defense for NATO. Now that you've added this entire massive front to that eastern flank, and particularly that northern eastern flank, it adds to NATO's defensibility. It removes that kind of smaller, more difficult to defend area and adds this. And if you know anything about Finnish history, you will know you do not want to come here and fight the Finns. Through just centuries, they have defended this territory, and it is what they are excellent at. So I think Finland brings just a tremendous amount of capability and capacity to the NATO alliance.
This exercise includes service members from 18 allied nations, including British troops. What do they think of the drill, and how are they coping with the Finnish conditions?
The exercise is a real opportunity to come together with our multinational partners and innovate and exercise interoperability. The new weapon systems, both the ones that our new NATO partners are bringing in, so the Swedes have brought Archer across and working with them, but also for the UK, the first live firing of Archer is a real achievement here in Finland. And so I think that combination of the UK stepping forward and bringing new systems into the NATO battle, but also working alongside our NATO partners is really making a big step forwards for NATO interoperability. Finns, obviously, they are the past masters of operating in this environment, and so we're learning from them how to operate in this particular part of the High North. It's new, it's unseasonably warm, and the fact that we've been stood out here for a little while is if we were in the normal conditions about -20, I don't think we'd be standing out here for quite as long. So it's been kind to us, but it's still been more challenging than operating in the UK. So that's great to increase the skills, the mindset, the training of our soldiers.
This is a different environment, and what we're learning from our Finnish allies is how do you operate in the field. It's down to simple things such as how do you keep warm, what equipment you use. So that's really, really valuable for us to understand. And of course, they are the experts. This is their home ground, and we are learning a significant amount from our Finnish allies.
British troops are not only learning how to survive in the cold weather, but they are also learning valuable lessons from the war in Ukraine.
So we're focusing on fires and the control of fires, in particular, the ability to mass fires and the coordination of fires, not across just one unit, but across a number of nations. So the key example I would give at the moment is in my headquarters, I have staff officers from a lot of the other nationalities, and I can execute a plan or a mission from a Swedish observer and task a French battalion to engage it. So this is one of the sort of key things that we are able to do with our digital systems is execute targets, and it really doesn't matter, which nationality. What matters to us is getting the right effect based upon the weapon system.
Finally, I wanted to know what it really means for Finland to join NATO, and more importantly, why they did it now.
And the Finnish researchers about 5 years ago, they were discussing about this thing that the only factor that would force Finland to join NATO is Russia, and that's what had happened. But NATO is a defensive alliance. We are not. It's also concerning this exercise. This is not aimed against anybody. We are just defending, planning and exercising how to defend Lapland and the northern flank of NATO.
What does that mean for Finnish conscripts?
It brings security, most importantly. Yeah, and it's also a great opportunity, as I said, to improve our own skills, or improve our military, improve our army.
We're part of something. We have something to give, and then they have something to offer for us. And in my point of view, because I'm training conscripts, it doesn't affect my work that much. We here, although this is a multinational exercise, we're doing everything pretty much the same way in my platoon as we do it in our own exercises. We're adapting our ways to operate to the international to the Union ways to operate.
Ukraine had lots of assets before the war, and that was not enough to prevent what has happened. And as our former president of Republic said that if somebody from Russia would like to ask why did you join NATO, then look at the mirror, you caused this. That's the reason.
That's where this tape stops, but we'll be back soon to play through more Geopolitics on tape.